Hi, this is Lisa, and you are listening to I Love That Movie. This podcast is for movie lovers. It's not an unbiased opinion, it's not a straightforward review, it's just a couple people talking about a movie that they love. The format is each week I have a guest, and that guest and I discuss a movie that they love, something they're obsessed with, something they connect with. We'll talk about the plot, the director, and the actors, but we'll also talk about the personal connection my guest has with that movie. So if that sounds like something you want to listen to, keep listening. Hey, this is Lisa, and you can find me on Twitter at ILTM Podcast. I'm also on Instagram at I Love That Movie Podcast, and you can support us on Patreon. Uh, every show is free, obviously. You're listening to this for free. But if you want to support us on the Patreon, you can. That's at www.patreon.com/I Love That Movie. And if you sign up, you do get a bonus episode. So right now, mostly just covering what I'm watching in theaters and, talking a lot about what I'm watching on TV as well, if you can call it TV anymore. Maybe it's just content now, but, talking about like Stranger Things and, everything else that's not movies that are, something that my guest has chose. That's on the Patreon. And I do want to take a moment to thank my top patrons, and they are Chris Balga, Jeff Widman, Philip Barker, and Michael Cross. Thank you guys so much for keeping the lights on. And if you like what you hear today, and I hope you do, please subscribe and rate this show. It does help new listeners find us. So I have a new guest here today. I have Mark from the Visually Stunning Movie Podcast. Say hi, Mark.
Hi, Mark.
Hey, well, nice to have another movie podcast on this podcast. I can tell you like movies.
I live for them. I've watched entirely too many just this year alone.
Well, you're in good company on that. But if you want to, can you kind of introduce yourself a little bit? You can talk about your podcast and your background with movies.
Absolutely. I've been a long time movie watcher, but I never considered myself a critic until I studied English literature in college. Amazingly, when story and plot and character became really important. And it's funny how that translates to film. God, it's almost 6 years now ago. I conned a couple of people into doing the Visually Stunning Movie Podcast with me to actually talk about films, sometimes seriously, sometimes not so seriously. But it's been a great ride, and if you want to check out what we do, you can follow us on Twitter at VS Movie Podcast, or go to vsmoviepodcast.com, where you will get everything I could possibly do, written and blurbing. But no, it's like you. Yeah, if you love movies, you just feel compelled to talk about them. Sometimes writing about them isn't enough. You just need to have someone to talk with. And I think that's the
Yes,
fun part of doing stuff like this.
100%. And if this is your first time listening, my guests actually pick the movie. So sometimes I get questions like, when are you going to talk about this movie, that movie? I'm like, when you pick it. So with that said, what movie did you choose to talk about today?
Oh, tonight I chose a film that everyone loves him for it, and a lot of people hate him for it simultaneously. The 1994 debut of one Kevin Smith, Clerks.
Okay, yeah. So I'm going to give you my background, and I feel like if I don't, people are going to call me out on this. I always get questions that are like, what if you aren't a huge fan of a movie, or what if you're not, well, by the way, it doesn't apply to this, but I'm just, people are like, what if you hate it, or what if you aren't as interested, or what would you do, because this show we talk about how much we love movies. And to that, I say what's really exciting to me about visiting movies that maybe I haven't visited before, or maybe I even didn't like before, or maybe just that I'm not as interested or something like that. What's cool about having someone on that really loves it is they kind of, well, number one, you revisit it, right? So you might have put it in a wheelhouse of like, oh, I'm not as interested, or whatever reason you had for not seeing it. So you watch it again, and you're viewing it through the eyes of someone that loves it. So as you watch it, you're like, I'm going to talk about this, and I'm going to talk about this with someone that really loves it. So I would say that I'm probably not a big Kevin Smith fan, if I'm honest. I'm on eggshells here. I'm feeling anxious admitting this on air because I feel like most of the people that listen to this podcast love Kevin Smith. But that being said, it was kind of exciting to me to revisit this movie because I have seen it before, but I knew that we were going to talk about today loving it. So I'm happy to report that I saw it again and I saw it differently this time than the first time I saw it. And I think I've only seen this movie twice now. So we'll talk more about that as we get into it, but hopefully that didn't terrify you and we can still have a good conversation about it.
I think so.
I'm done talking about me and my experience with the movie. Let's talk about you. When did you first see this? What is your history with this film? Go ahead.
Well, I people always ask us like, well, when did you first see this film? I mean, there was a, and I honestly I don't remember the first time I see a lot of films. I mean, I remember how I maybe felt the first time, but I couldn't tell you, oh, I saw that in my junior year of high school or whatever. Because and there was a big swath of time where I just didn't see movies.
Mhm.
I was in the military, and I had a young child. I was working all the time, and movies just a were expensive, and b I didn't have the time for.
Yeah.
So you find a lot of stuff on on cable. If all you young kids out there remember cable before you cut all the cords, but cable, and I freely admit that I carried a Blockbuster and a Hollywood Video membership card, so I rented both
Oh,
tapes and
same.
DVDs. Uh, and so you see a lot of movies there. So I don't remember the first time I saw Clerks, but I can tell you that the first time I saw it, I was just it was almost shell shock, um, because it was so. I mean, he Kevin Smith wrote the film about his life in New Jersey,
Right,
and
right.
then but I recognized like all of the archetypes in this film, all of his characters. I'm like, I know that guy, I know that guy, I know her, I know him, I know her, and and you see, and I see myself in a lot of his characters. But what I really remember is just the the really tight and machine gun dialogue,
Mhm.
that his characters have. Um, I think his I'm going to call it patter, but that back and forth stuff, I like that better than I like the way I like his monologues, but I like that better than I like some of his monologues that he'll give his
Mhm.
characters. Um, and as it turns out, as a frustrated writer, I tend to write a lot of dialogue, and so it that appealed to me. It's like you can actually do just a lot of stuff really creatively with that dialogue, and people are like, oh, show don't tell. It's like, yeah, but you can show a lot through dialogue. You can learn a lot about a character not talking about themselves, you know.
Oh, for
So
sure. I
yeah,
mean,
I
yeah,
don't.
absolutely.
So it's but the way he constructs his dialogue is just so you learn so much from them talking about nothing or something completely foreign. You learn so much about his characters, and I loved the way that worked. And for the record, I always fancied myself a Randall Graves, but I'm really probably more of a Dante Hicks. Um,
I think we're probably all more of a Dante, right? He's definitely like the
I think we
straight
all
man. He's not the cool one, and so we probably all see ourselves more in him unless we're really, really cool, which, it's something I definitely cannot claim to be. So
but we all wish we were Randall.
right, 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 because he's so honest and he's so raw about like who he is, whereas Dante is sort of kind of it takes him the whole movie to really admit to himself who he is.
Yeah, and
And I
who
think
he is
we all
not.
probably
Yes.
vibe with that. Yeah, exactly. And I think, for me, I think when this came out, let's see, well, when it came out, truthfully, I probably would have been 9 or something like that. So I didn't see it then.
Oh,
Um,
I feel so old now.
but when I was a little older, I guess teenager, 18, 19, 20, around there, I wonder if part of the reason why I didn't like this movie is I needed to have some more distance from this time period in my life to appreciate it more. Like, almost like it's a little too close to home in some
It's a
ways.
little too on the nose.
Yeah, it's kinda like the other movie like that that is especially at the time was painful for me to watch is that movie, I think it's just called Waiting. You know that movie about waiting
With
tables? Is it
Ryan
called Waiting?
Reynolds.
Yes,
I
that
don't think I've
movie.
ever actually watched the entire thing.
Oh god. Well, when it came out, I was waiting tables, and I remember watching it and thinking literally while I was watching it, "I have to quit. Like, I can't do this anymore." Like,
Right.
this is a depressing mirror of what my
That's
life is like.
like
And I
going to
think
college and watching Real Genius.
yeah, it's like with this movie, I think I kind of, like Dante, I guess, maybe thought I was better than this movie, and then now in hindsight, I'm like, "No, I think maybe I related more to this than I realized." But yeah, I think maybe I needed more time away from that point in my life, and so that's why now it's, like, easier to watch. So, anyway, that's
Well,
just me telling on myself.
yeah, and well, no, and it is it's an easy watch if you just, I mean, because it is crude. It is hard. It is blunt. It is very raw. I mean, his writing is raw, but I mean, you see why you hate to invoke the name of Harvey Weinstein, but you see why Weinstein bought it for Miramax.
Yeah,
So
I would say oh, go ahead, sorry.
no, so you know, it is all there. It is really raw, but if you watch it, there's also uh, in a lot of ways a real sense of joy in
Mhm.
the film, that if you can identify with that, because there are moments that are just really joyful,
Yeah.
and those are always fun to happen back across, because it always seems to happen again in this just terrible, horrible, no good day for Dante. But then there's those moments where, you know, just for that brief fleeting moment, all was right with the world, and then it's gone. And it reminds you that, yeah, those moments do exist. No matter how bad your day is, there's always a moment that reminds you
It
that you'll be okay.
for sure, and, you know, I think one thing I thought about and we always kinda talk about stuff like this on the show too, I wondered how some of the humor would age, you know? I remember back when I was younger, I had a friend that was a really big Kevin Smith fan, and there were some of the movies I didn't like as much, or some of the jokes or whatever. And he said, "Oh yeah, I think you know Lisa's very sensitive to vulgar stuff." And I was like, "No, that's not it." Um, but now that I'm like watching this again, I think like I wonder what a younger person would think watching this. I would say a lot of it is about the context of, like, the '90s, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and what the '90s were like, and how I mean, this movie, like, has a really like, isn't it, like wasn't it originally, like, NC-17 or something like that? Is that
Uh,
right? Or they tried to give it, like, a really hard R because of
well,
the language, which sounds dumb
it probably
now.
should be. I know, right? Well,
Yeah, like, now
it's
you're
still
like, there's
rated
no
R.
nudity, there's no but at the same time, the things they were talking about, I think in the '90s were so taboo. It's like, it was shocking to see a movie and see people talk like this in a film, almost. Like,
Yeah,
there were movies with curse words and everything, and sex was in movies still, but I think this movie just it sort of implied like, "Hey, this is what people actually talk like," you know, and for some people, that's a bridge too far,
I know,
and
because God forbid we put in our movies how people actually are.
exactly, and I think, you know, when you're thinking about, say, like, the Reagan era and, like, a lot of censorship and stuff like that, I really see this movie as, like, a reaction to that, you know? So while some of the jokes maybe today we might go, "Oh, I'm not sure about this," or "I'm not sure about that," or "How does that play?" It's like, keep it in the context of, like, you know, talking about sex and talk and using the words that they're using is almost, like, taboo, you know? Like, I feel like now when we watch movies, we're desensitized to a lot of that stuff. But I feel like there was a moment in time where this was just like that's why it spoke to people so much is they were like, "Wow, I'm like watching this movie and people are acting like how they really act and they really discuss all these things that are typically taboo in film." So, I don't know, I just again, like watching it so many years later, I just have like a different view of how I saw it the first time.
Yeah, it's if it was released today, I don't know that it. I think it does okay. I don't know that it becomes what it is
No, yeah, exactly.
Because and it is part of it. You know, the language is not shocking anymore. I mean, there's a couple spots where you're like, whoo, just not any particular word, but the strings of them, and you know,
Right.
the sequences of the conversations might put a few people off. But yeah, it is again, but which makes it all the more remarkable, really, when you look back at it, that it was
Mhm.
made in 1994 and somebody put it on a movie screen and people paid money to see it.
Exactly, and, I was thinking watching it too that we had an idea on film of what nerds are like, and nerds are, like in the movie Revenge of the Nerds. They're smart, they're geeky, they're picked on, they're outcasts. And in this movie, it shows like a different profile of a nerd that's kind of cool in some ways. They do drugs, they drink, they party, they sleep around, but they still like all those geeky things. And I think that really spoke to a lot of people because I think that's maybe a more relatable picture of a nerd than a genius, at least for me.
Well,
Again, outing myself as not a genius.
right, well, yeah, I see what you're saying. The idea of nerddom, between, you know, in the last, oh dear lord, what is it, 28 years, wow, since this film came out. uh
I know it's kind of scary to
that's
think about.
crazy. um but no, the idea of nerd, I mean, you hear it a lot in pop culture,
Hmm.
um that, you know, nerds run the world now. Not just, you know,
100%.
the nerds, they're not just, you know, working the computers, they're running the companies and they're choosing what films are being made. And you know, Elon Musk is building, you know, he's sending spaceships into space, and you know, and he's a nerd by, you know, by
Hmm.
the old
Yeah.
definition. So yeah, I mean, it's so the evolution of nerd, um it I think some people would still like nerd to be the pejorative that it used to be. um but even back in the day, it was never really among nerds. I mean, nerds were always proud of it, but they understood their social caste, and so
Yeah.
they just operated within it. I think like I'll say it, I was a nerd. I'm still a nerd, but you know,
I mean, we're on a movie
we'll
podcast right now,
we'll
and you have
find
a
our
movie
way.
podcast. We're
You know,
nerds. It's okay.
yeah, but you know, the nerds figured out that eventually, because even, you know, because the uh and even if you go all the way back to the John Hughes films, stop and think about it. Everyone, you know, high school uh, doesn't last forever, and the ones that were most terrified of that were the popular kids.
Sure.
It was never, the nerds were always ready to go.
Yeah, and
You
they
know what I
couldn't wait to
mean?
get out of there.
Yeah,
At
because
least maybe I'm
that's
speaking about
not
my
the world.
experience.
You know,
Yeah, true.
life doesn't revolve around that. So it's an interesting evolution of nerd, from this. I never actually considered these guys. Well, now I guess in retrospect,
I mean, they talk about
everyone
Star
is
Wars, comics, you know what I mean?
everyone
Like,
is a nerd about something.
yeah, that's true.
Because if you stop and think about it, in the say in the 50s, you know, think about George Lucas doing American Graffiti. All those gearheads, they were all
Mhm.
car nerds, but they were not nerds. You know what I mean?
For sure.
But they were car nerds. So technically, nerds have been around for a long time. Everyone is a nerd about something. Everyone, there's an expression, nerding out.
Yeah,
Everyone has something they can nerd out about.
for sure.
And if you
I
can do that,
agree.
you're a nerd.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. Um, so the next part of this podcast, I usually talk about a couple of quick facts. Oh, wait, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm going to read a summary as if people don't know what this movie's about. I will say that if you haven't seen this movie before, I would pause here and go watch it. I actually saw it for free on Tubi. So a little plug there. But I would go watch it and come back. And if you're still here, this is the summary of the movie Clerks. So Dante is called in to cover his shift at his New Jersey convenience store on his day off. His friend Randall helps him pass the time, neglecting his video store customers next door to hang out at the Quick Stop. The uneventful day is disrupted by news that one of Dante's ex girlfriends has died, and after attending her memorial service, Dante muses over staying with his current girlfriend Veronica or reuniting with his ex Caitlin.
And
In a
hilarity
nutshell.
ensues.
Yeah, so not can't be too worried about spoilers, right? I mean, that's not it's about the journey, not the destination, right?
Exactly.
So and then the next part of this podcast, I usually talk about a couple of quick facts. I'm sure listeners out there and you yourself, Mark, probably have way better facts than I'm about to give you. But I'm going to give a couple and jump in when you want or give some too. Here we go. So the first one I have is that Kevin Smith, we know he is a keen comic book fan. He's actually sold a large part of his collection to help fund this film. I like to on IMDb they added he has since been able to buy most of them back. I'm like, yeah, I would imagine he might have some money to buy things back now
Yep.
after
And he
this.
maxed out his credit cards.
I mean, is it a movie, especially back then, if you don't do that?
Is it an indie film? Yeah.
Yeah. Um, the other one of the other ones I have was that Jason Reitman said that this film inspired him to be a filmmaker, and that he told Kevin Smith this, which led to Smith jokingly saying, "How can you be the son of Ivan Reitman and you grew up on the sets of Ghostbusters and Stripes, but it took me to make you a director?" And I just thought that was
That
funny.
yeah, that would have been where I would have gone.
Yeah, I would have been like
What are you thinking, man?
Ghostbusters. And then the last one I have is that Kevin Smith said on speaking tours that the reason he cast himself in the movie was that if the movie failed and he was in near permanent debt for the rest of his life, he could at least point to the fact that he was in the movie as proof that he made it.
Yep. He also actually was originally really early on. He was going to be Dante,
I mean, you can see that,
and
right?
then well, and he figured out that he can't really act. So he's like, well, no. So then, yeah, the Silent Bob became Kev. My favorite Kevin Smith story about Clerks. He rebooted Jay and Silent Bob like
Mhm.
2 years ago. Oh my god, 2 years ago, right before the Great Darkness. And he toured with it, and I went and saw him and got to meet him. But
Oh,
he
awesome.
did a little Q&A beforehand, and he was talking about
That's
it.
so
And
cool.
one of the yeah, and it was a fun experience at the little venue we were at because it wasn't really a theater. It was a music venue, which was really cool. But so he was talking about it, and he went back to in the day when he was about he was about to sell Clerks to Miramax, and they were doing the contract and this and that and the other. He actually doesn't own Clerks. Miramax
Oh, I
owns the
didn't know
rights.
that.
Miramax owns the right to Clerks
Hmm.
and a lot of other things. But one thing he managed to get in all of the contract wrangling in those early films, um, he owns Jay and Silent Bob as characters,
Okay. Well, that makes sense.
which is why he's been able to continue to make films starring Jay and Silent Bob because no one can actually stop him because he doesn't have
Wow.
to ask
Loopholes.
anybody, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's funny because apparently they were like, "What do you want?" And he kind of asked his agent at the time, and he's like, "Can we do that?" And he's like, I don't know. They're your character. We can ask." And of course, they're like, "Why would we?" Yeah, you can have the stoner and the guy that doesn't talk.
Little did they know.
Little did they know. It's kind of like when Sony failed to buy all of Marvel and
Mhm.
instead just took Spider-Man and all of his ilk, leading
Yeah,
to the
and
great
then it's like in
Marvel diaspora.
retrospect, yeah, it's like, well, we can take B characters and make all kinds of movies with them, so that doesn't even
Exactly.
matter.
So, but that's one of my favorite
Um,
Kevin Smiths. And that's why we get more Jay and Silent Bob is because he actually those are the ones he owns.
Very cool.
But
Well,
and he did just finish. Well,
go ahead, no.
last fall they finished shooting Clerks 3.
I actually saw today on Twitter that Kevin Smith was supposed to come to Dallas for an upcoming convention,
Yes.
and he said that he's not going to because he's gonna be hanging out with his mom that weekend. He's like, "She's 77, she comes first."
Yep.
She asked me to spend time with her, and I thought that was really sweet.
It
So
is.
just wanted to
Apparently, he just tested. I guess he was positive for COVID, And today he posted on Instagram that so he's back negative.
Oh, well,
Um,
that's good
but
too.
he
That's good. Be negative before mom comes for
right.
sure.
And then actually the week after that Dallas event, he is currently still slated to appear at a Denver event that I am flying over the mountains to go to. So
Nice.
yes, so it'll be, but they'll all be there, which
Oh,
is
really?
awesome.
Okay.
Yes. So yeah, I've already paid for my group photo with that. But yeah, so he is
Nice.
scheduled. So yeah, he should spend a nice weekend with mom and then truck up to Dallas. And then he is actually slated in September to show up here in Salt Lake at our geek event. So
Oh, very cool. Is that a Salt Lake
fanxsaltlake.com,
City Comic Con or?
fanx.
Hmm. Very
So
cool.
yep, every fall like clockwork. Wow, almost like clockwork.
Except for the
Except for the
dark
great
times, as you
darkness,
mentioned.
yes.
Well, at this point, I mean, we've talked about Kevin Smith a little bit, and I'm sure we'll talk about the cast too, but I feel like this is one of those movies where instead of going through the whole cast, maybe we should just talk about some of your favorite scenes from the movie.
You know, the there's one, well there's so many. This movie is it's really quotable.
Very, yeah.
There's a lot of really good pull quotes that you can just work into everyday life. Out of this, of course, the one they should have put on the poster is, I'm not even supposed to be here today, and who hasn't felt like that at work at some point?
No kidding,
Um,
especially in your early 20s, I think.
and
Yeah.
and one that I use almost daily is actually a bunch of savages in this town. In terms of course, in the film, of someone having jammed gum in the locks of the shutters that pull down over the store windows, which, if you don't know, was actually a plot device. Or it was a production workaround because they shot at night in the
Oh,
store
so they
because the
didn't,
store was
yeah.
closed. So the only way they could not show outside at night when the movie was set during the daytime was to have the shutters down.
That makes sense, although it
So
also feels like something that would very much happen at a job like that.
yeah, a bunch of savages in this town. So, but no, of course, the discussion about the destruction of the Death Star is one of my personal
Yeah,
favorites. I
yeah,
thought about it. Last. I don't know when this is going to, over Memorial Day weekend. I was out in Anaheim for Star Wars Celebration,
that's right.
which I did 16-minute episode on that. I don't want to spoil anyone, so if you want to go and listen to that, you can listen to my
That must have
experiences
been so fun.
at Star Wars Celebration. Sure, listen to it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't want to spoil it.
Okay,
But
okay.
no, but that scene is just, it's great because everyone knows Star Wars, whether you've seen Star Wars or not. It's 94, so it's, you know, just post Gulf War, and you're talking
Mhm,
about terrorism and rebel forces. It's just really smartly written.
mhm.
So as a geek and a writer, that scene always appeals to me. Um, and then the end, post fight, when they're recovering in the store, and Randall just lays it all out for Dante. He just
Yes.
kind of
I
defines the world in which they live in, and it's unvarnished, best friend truth. And
it is. It
and I
is.
don't know. I talk to my wife about this a lot when we're watching stuff. You'll see two guys have a fight or something, and then they'll just walk off. But you know, it'll be, we cool, and then we're done. And it's just like, I don't know. I don't know if two women in that situation recover as fast as two guys do, because guys like go to 80 and then drop right back down to 0,
Well,
especially with their
else
friends. Whereas
yeah.
whereas anecdotally and stereotypically, women will nurse a grudge, and
Well,
they'll
I
just
would say women have more open communication, though. Like, I think our feelings are kind of traditionally, not everybody, but it's like because we have a closer relationship where we're being a little bit raw and a little bit more emotionally connected to each other, it maybe doesn't get to this head the same way. Whereas guys, I think, kind of keep again, traditionally, keep their feelings close to their chest and then they explode. Could be another way to look at it,
and
too.
then we recover. Yeah, that's just,
Yeah.
yeah.
And
It's
so
it's a
it's
very
like,
weird bounce.
yeah, so that could be, but it is true. Like, I mean, grudges can be, I mean, I think that's why the grudges stand out more because if you have open communication all the time and you're still mad, it's probably something serious, but
that is also true.
but
But no,
yeah, I
those are two of my favorites.
yeah. Oh well, I think my favorite probably is that confrontation at the end because I think very so few times in our life does anybody call us on our bullshit, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think Dante's getting called on that here, and it's I mean, I don't know. I've never personally been brave enough to tell my friend like, you're lying to yourself, buddy. Like, come on, you know what's really going on here, and then just give them the honest truth like that. But it's very satisfying to watch, and
Yeah,
I think a lot of us can relate to it. Like the whole, he's like, if you don't like it, why don't you just get a different job and blah blah blah. And it's like, ooh, that stings
yeah.
because it's so true.
Well, and then he mirrors that actually in Clerks too,
Mhm.
when they're in jail. Ironically
Oh
enough,
yeah, man, it's
near
been
the
a
end.
long time since I've seen that one, so I'd have to
Yeah,
see
it's a
that
little
again
that's a
too.
little more raw than Clerks is in a lot of ways. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, so he mirrors that again. But again, it's Randall providing just this unvarnished, but in a way he it's weird because in the first one, Randall is really he's piercing Dante's like emotional barriers with that
Mhm.
whole tirade at the end.
Yeah.
In Clerks too, he if you remember the scene in the Dante, well, what would you have done? And he tells him he's piercing his own emotional barriers at that point, and
Mm.
he's confessing to Dante something that he like barely confessing to himself.
Yeah.
And so it's a mirrored scene, but it's from the other direction, and it's just again, that's why I love it. He's able to call back. His writing is just so smart in that way.
Mm.
Whatever else you might think of his movies, if you can objectively look at a lot of it, it's just really well written in this universe that he's constructed.
Yeah, yeah. Um, so true. Well, what's another good scene that you like?
Uh, you know, from a purely nostalgic standpoint, I really love when Randall goes to big time video.
Yeah,
Because you just scrolling through the Netflix menu is not the same.
it's really not. And I think any movie where they go to a video store or someone works at a video store, it's borderline painful for me because I think I miss that time so deeply. There's just man, there was just something about it, right? Like, I mean, every Friday night or Saturday night, hated those late fees though.
Oh yeah.
But other than that, um, man, going to the video store was so great.
Well,
And
and I mean, it was an event because you had to get there at a certain time.
mhm,
Um,
and you had to rewind, and
and you had
yeah,
well, but you had to beat everyone else because there was a time when there weren't. In this era of unlimited streaming, there was a time when there was like one copy of a movie.
right. I remember
Um,
when Blockbuster started carrying extra copies, and they would still run out of stuff, and you were
right, and
like,
then of course they'd have
no.
the wall of the new releases where they'd have like
Mhm.
40 or 50 copies. But if you were not there when those were put on the shelf on opening day or on release day, you wouldn't get it. So it became a dude, come on, we got to go, 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 we got to go. And I can't tell you how many weekends that I remember Fridays that doing that, getting with my buddies, going, dude, we got to go, we got to go. It's like you're going to be late for a concert or something, yeah,
Yeah,
or you're going to miss happy hour. But no, you're going to miss the movies, and then God forbid you're there late and now you're trolling the rest of the store. But at least there were options. But yeah, the big time video when he's just in there, he's just overwhelmed in the best possible way because he's in an actual video store, not crappy RST video where he works next to the quick stop.
well,
It's
where
just
he
beautiful.
works reminds me a little bit more of like where some of the jobs I had. I think it kind of reminds me of like when I worked at like a comic shop, or for a while I worked at Suncoast, when that was a thing.
No, I remember.
And and like those scenes kind of remind me of that time in my life. So I think this probably again, I wonder if when I saw this, did I maybe I didn't have those jobs yet, or I don't know, but they definitely remind me of that time now.
Yeah, they're see. I I never had a real job like that. I mean, I graduated high school and then 6, 8 months later, I wound up going into the Air Force. And so the closest I had to having like a geek job was a part timer when I was still active duty. I was stationed in Korea, and I worked 6 months at the, oh, this is going to hurt to say, at the internet cafe.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Not a thing so much these
not
days.
a thing, no, unless you're in Europe, apparently, where they, I think, still have those, at least according to every spy movie I've ever seen lately. There's
Yeah, that
always an
feels very
internet
much
cafe,
like in a mystery movie where they go to the library and they do the microfiche.
right? Oh my
You're like, are
gosh.
people doing that still?
God, I my microfiche was never the cool spools. It was always the flats, which is
Yeah.
terrible, but impossible to navigate. But no, so that was close I came to. But yeah, the but for me, I think the equation, or the similar situation, you having those jobs and now seeing those jobs and seeing them a little differently, um, is I tell people one of the greatest TV shows of all time is MASH, and MASH is funny. And
Mhm.
then if you join the military, MASH becomes funnier. And then
Oh.
if you go to Korea, MASH becomes even funnier. And so a frame of reference can completely change, sorry, Obi-Wan Kenobi, but from a certain point of view, everything looks a little different. Uh,
Yeah.
but but yeah, so you may have been either jaded by the jobs you had, going, my job is not this cool, or in retrospect now it might be, maybe that job was kind of cool.
Yeah, I think at the time in my life, I probably well, I loved Suncoast, that was great. But some of the jobs I had, I felt very much like I had kind of complaints similar to Dante as like I felt like the responsible one at that job. I felt like the job was beneath me sometimes. And then when I look back on it, I'm like, that was a pretty good time in my life where I didn't have a ton of responsibility.
Responsibility.
Yeah. And so it's like, Dante feels very burdened by this job where he works a million hours and then he's upset when he misses that hockey game. But man, when you're older, you're like, I don't have a hockey game to play with a bunch of my friends now,
Right.
So it's like so different, but yeah.
But you also learn that you can't be the hyper resp I mean, you have to be responsible, but you can't.
Sure.
Dante kind of became a union of one for the hockey game,
Mhm.
where he unionized the quick stop,
Mhm.
and it's no. So uh, his little act of rebellion, of course, it did cost him a lot of Gatorade.
It did.
So,
It did.
but no, it's just such a film that there's so many aspects of it, and so many different ways to approach watching it, that I
Mhm.
said, I mean, if you don't like the language and you can't allow yourself to get past the language, then you're not going to be able to find something. If you can get past those aspects of it, there's just a lot of really quality filmmaking, and I'm sure Kevin would cringe if he heard that. Uh, Maybe, but there's a lot of quality filmmaking in terms of script and character development, and the performances are good, and his direction is good. You know, it's just it's just I think it is a movie that stands up. Um,
Mhm.
and I don't know if you saw the alternate ending,
I did not. Tell
or
me
the
about
the
that.
actual after after Randall leaves at the end of the night when Dante's cleaning up. Um, the store is technically still open, so Dante's behind the counter, and there's just a tracking shot up the aisle of someone coming up, and he's leaning over the aisle reading a magazine, and it's a burglar, and Dante gets shot and killed,
That's
and they
awful.
and they cut to black. He did not go with that ending.
I don't like that ending.
Yeah, it was a little too down, I think, after
It
after
it kind of
everything else. But if you stop and think about that, that pretty much just would have been the perfect way for poor Dante to end his day. Um,
That's true. It's kind of funny in the context of the film.
of the film. But yeah, I'm glad he didn't. But yeah, that's one of the that's an interesting. It can always be worse.
True. Yeah. Very true.
So
I think for me, like, you're talking about some of your favorite scenes. I think for me, one of my favorite scenes is when Randall is at the video store and that woman comes in, that customer, and she's asking him which movie,
oh
does
yeah,
he like better? And, he says, I haven't seen it. And then she goes, what about these? And he goes, they suck. And then she gets mad and says, and he's like, well, I don't appreciate your ruse.
Yes, I don't appreciate your ruse, your clever attempt to trick me.
But he never actually looks up from his newspaper. And it's like that feels very much like, I don't know. I was probably the opposite of Randall. I wish I could have been Randall, but was very like customer service oriented. So I think that part's really funny.
Yeah, God, stop and think about that lady was probably the first Karen,
She was the original, the OG Karen.
the OG Karen.
But yeah, and it also goes to show just how like it's sort of like a little bit of a class thing too, like of, when you work at those kind of jobs and how you view people that are taking it a little bit too seriously and
Hmm.
like, demanding customer service, and it's like you're at a small time video store, lady, like in Jersey, like
Yeah, on the cover of the disc, it's actually that's their little pull out of just because they serve you doesn't mean they like you. So
exactly. They're
and it
just
is true,
clerks.
but treat your you don't know who's working over there. You don't know what's going on. You don't know if they're going to
Yeah.
spit in your food or spit water in your face.
True, be kind.
Yeah.
It's in your best interest.
No, I
But
think the other scene in the video store that I liked is when he's ordering movies. I mean,
oh
just
yeah,
because of
that part is really
the
funny.
absolute absurdity of because it literally had to be Kevin Smith sitting at the typewriter going, "What are the single most ridiculously offensive porn movie titles I can think of?"
And the mom just like sitting there while he's listing all that off.
What holding her daughter because yeah, she wants to order a Happy Scrappy Hero Pup is the name of the film that they want to order for the kid. Obviously, the kid is
Yeah.
not actually in frame when he's spouting off this litany of porn titles, but it's just and then the way Randall is articulating them all
Yeah,
is
like
just it's like he's reading Pulitzer Prize nominees. It's just so incredible, and you get the feeling that he would read them exactly the same if there was no one in the store.
right, right, right.
It's just again it just goes back to the writing and how yeah it's crude but it's smart at the same time the way that script is put together, and I know he agonized over that film for a long time, and then thank God he finally got to make it.
Yeah. I think another thing I like, but maybe it's not a scene, but it's just like a thought I had of, there's a couple time capsule things in the movie, the video store being one of them, the payphone, which I think it's hilarious that they don't have like a regular landline. They have like that payphone that they
Yep.
keep getting on. Um, but the other thing too is where Randall sells that kid a cigarette.
Oh right,
And,
he
a
sold
couple
cigarettes to a
thoughts.
4-year-old.
Yeah. And it's like, well, number one, I think, you know, a for people that are younger, I feel like, if you look back in maybe the 60s and 70s, I don't think that you would have gotten in trouble for that. Like I could totally picture kids going into a store and going, "I'm buying mom some cigarettes." And they go, "Oh yeah, okay, this is for your mom. Here you go." And then they go, "Okay, now in the 90s we're going to have this fine, right?" And Dante gets fined in the movie because of what Randall did. But now, can you imagine what that fine would be?
Oh
I
my
mean, you'd like
God,
lose your license,
you'd
right?
lose
You'd
yeah
lose the ability to
you'd be
run the
fired
store.
immediately. Yeah, the store would be fined, the employee would be fired. There would be calls to burn the store down.
Yeah, I mean, it's
uh
so different today, but like, because I was thinking that watching that, like, I thought, oh my God, how is Dante going to pay that fine? And then I was like, oh, well, probably back then it was like $100 or something, but now it'd be like thousands of dollars if you're
yeah
selling kids cigarettes. Because I feel like at first it was probably more of like we're going to use this fine to discourage people, and now it's like that is not going to happen. But anyway, just a little time capsule. I think it's funny in the movie, and then I also just it was a different time.
yeah it is, but it's still oddly timeless.
Yes.
Just again in the characterization, but yeah, the selling of cigarettes, the oh shit, that 4-year-old, yeah, as opposed to all the other 4-year-olds you've sold cigarettes to over the years.
Well,
So
also
it's a
he was
normal
barely
thing.
looking up, so you could have maybe entertained that he didn't realize who he was selling them to, but then he drives it home with he knows exactly who it
Yeah,
was.
Oh, Randall is keenly aware of everything he does. You know,
Mhm, mhm.
he's kind of um, if you've ever seen Empire Records,
Yes, yes. Actually, we have an episode on that. Mhm.
he's kind of as calculating as Lucas,
Ah,
but not
yeah.
nearly as outgoing and gregarious as Lucas is. But
Yeah.
you know, but Randall is keenly aware of most of what he. I don't think he meant to knock the coffin over. That probably
No, I
wasn't in
don't
his
get the
master
sense that
plan.
he
But a
wanted
lot
that
of
to
other
happen.
stuff, I think he because he knows Dante,
Mhm.
he's very aware of which buttons he can push and which what levers he can pull to get certain results. And I think a lot of that is to see if he can get different results, which of course is the point of the whole movie is Dante getting different results.
Yeah. Well, what's your take in that line of thinking on his interference with Veronica?
At the end,
Mhm.
honestly, I honestly think that was like the one area that he was consistent throughout the entire film. Was telling Dante stop with the Caitlin Bree garbage.
Yeah. It's
Stop.
so annoying,
It's
right?
not going to happen. It's not going to happen. Veronica's great, even though he does nothing but relentlessly attack Veronica.
Well,
He gets what
yeah.
Veronica is for Dante, and he understands that that's a good thing, especially if his option, if you will, is Caitlin Bree. It's having to deal with Dante and Caitlin Bree again.
Well, the other thing too with Veronica that I was talking to actually to my husband about this after rewatching it, and he pointed something out to me that I hadn't thought of. But, there's this through line with Veronica, right, where they have that discussion about how many partners they have, and she makes this distinction of she doesn't think a certain act is technically sex, and he views it so differently, which I think played on a lot of different things socially at the time between men and women. That's a whole nother discussion we could get into, but we'd be here all day. But
But
anyway,
but
he
it's one that bears political relevance just a couple of years later.
Oh, yeah, that's true. I hadn't thought of that. But
So
I was telling my husband that I think especially at that time, like when I think of younger me, I think a lot of women would be on Veronica's side in the debate that they're having because I think women are viewed so differently in certain relationship situations that they almost feel like if I just do this then I haven't crossed that line and I won't get labeled this way. And he goes, what, this is actually worse, like you're more of being labeled that way now because of what you did. And it ironically he gets so angry at her that he like yells at her as she's going down the going out the door, like don't run it. I'll just say I'm going to paraphrase and not say what he says, but he's like, basically don't get with any other guys on your way wherever you're going next. But what's ironic about that is he's so loud about it and he tells Randall about it immediately that of course Randall's going to turn around and make fun of him. So he's actually the reason he's getting made fun of,
yeah, but
right?
again, but
Like he brought it up and he told everybody about it and then they turn around and get mad at, and make fun of him, and it's like a lot of it is about his own insecurity, right? Because it's like he's the one that brought that up in the first place. And he also makes a comment about how women are complicated, men are not, men are so easy to please. And then later something happens at the store, which is another scene that I feel like would be removed, involving Caitlin thinking she slept with him. And my husband pointed out, you notice how she like has a better time or is more, and she even mentions like you let me do what I wanted, stuff like that. So she was implying, he made this joke that like women are so complicated and you have to be so talented, but she actually has the best time with him when it wasn't him and when the person was dead. And I'm
yeah,
like, wow, I never thought about that. But it was like a double diss on himself. And I feel like even Randall picking on Veronica is kind of more to me about how Dante like put Veronica down and plays her down, and then Dante or Randall uses that to get to him.
he does. But I also think that when he tells Veronica at the end about the whole Caitlin Bree situation. I
Mhm.
honestly think that he's doing that from a place of love.
I agree because he knows that like Dante is spineless and he would have imploded his relationship anyway. I feel like Randall was like, let's just get this all out in the open now so that you can make a decision. And it needed to happen.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it did, and then bad things happen. But
Bad things happen,
you
but
gotta you gotta fight.
but it needed to happen. Yeah, I agree. I see that situation where he intervenes and tells Veronica, you're like, thank goodness he did that because if not, Dante was so spineless, he would have kept that going until it blew up in his face. So
Yep. And
it was
that's
better for him and for everyone, for Veronica also for that to come out when it did.
yep.
But yeah, it makes you so mad. We all had that friend that like kept going back to that relationship that you're like, what is wrong with you? I love when he's like, it was high school, like you're an adult.
Yeah.
And also, like, yeah, it's annoying when somebody has a partner that is good to them and yet, they're running around on them and being awful. So it's like, yeah, I agree. I think it was the right call.
Yeah, Caitlin was toxic.
Yeah, I
Uh,
mean, she clearly expresses in the movie, like, oh, well, this guy proposed to me. I didn't want to marry him, but I don't know what I want. I don't want to get married anytime soon. I mean, she's even telling him in that moment, like, even when we get back together, I'm not going to commit. So it's like, just, just no, just don't go back to that.
yeah, it was a bad place, and that was over by the end of the film anyway. But yeah, the whole he Dante probably would have just slunk back to Veronica and
Yeah.
tried to just under the rug. But
Yeah, and eventually she would have been like, "Okay, I could do better," which she could.
yeah,
Like, and she makes lasagna, which I think is challenging to make. So I say she's
I
a good.
actually somewhere on one of my shelves behind me, I have a magnet with Veronica's lasagna recipe
Nice.
autographed by Marilyn Gigliotti.
Oh, that's so
I
cute.
got it at a
Yeah,
convention a
I
few years
love
back. It's like,
lasagna, so
it's great. Yeah, I know. I'm half Italian,
I'm
so
like, when that happens in the movie, I'm like, made him a lasagna. That I feel like that takes time. It's
yeah, I
not like
know,
just
right?
making a pie. Like that's you gotta and it sounds like it'd be really good, and I don't know. But yeah, I like Veronica, so I agree with you. I think that was a good call on Randall's
Oh,
part.
100%. Absolutely. But no, it so yeah, we see the entire gamut of their relationship, Dante and
Oh
Randall's
yeah.
friendship. And I love that carries forward into the sequel, and then it will carry into the next sequel. I'll be interested to see how that gets played. Let me put it that way. I'll see where that goes, because the end, of course, of Clerks 2 is very optimistic. I mean, not even in like a kind of a it's unabashedly optimistic,
Hmm.
which is unusual for a lot of Kevin's films. But no, Clerks 2 it ends on a really high note. I mean, Clerks 2, you can there's a light at the end of the tunnel, but that tunnel may still collapse. But Clerks 2, I mean, all the garbage that goes before they actually come out of the tunnel, and they're standing in the sun. So I'll be interested to see what happens now in 3, to see what he does with that. Ought to be a good time. So, once he got Jeff to come back as Randall, uh,
Mm.
that was the stumbling block. So I'll be interested to see where Randall is now.
What would Randall be up to these days?
I don't know. Randall and Dante are my age, so I'll be interested to see what my alternate selves might have become. Uh,
Yeah, yeah. Well, in the area that you're in, do you relate to the part where they're like playing hockey?
um,
Can you tell I don't know much about Utah?
well, no, well, Utah has a semi-pro IHL, so one level down, I guess, from the NHL. They have hockey. Utah is actually really weird. Utah has two major colleges for college football. They have pro basketball, minor league hockey, major league soccer with a championship. Um, this is a very sports oriented community out here, and so um, but hockey at like the kid level or high school level isn't really a thing.
Okay, so
It's
kinda
not.
like here. I mean,
Yeah, it's
we have the stars, right? But, like, at the same time, you know, for instance, right now, it's, like, almost 100 degrees outside, so there's not a lot of hockey in Texas.
right. I mean,
Um,
we have a there's a lot of intramural or sport or school or rec league, soccer, basketball, the junior jazz program is the basketball stuff. But so it starts like the kids kind of young, but obviously high school basketball is still good. High school football is a big thing everywhere, as it is in Texas. I used to live down there.
oh, yeah. Yeah,
Um,
like, if this were set in Texas, they would be playing football.
well, if this were
But
set
it's
in
like I
Texas, it
always
would be Dazed and Confused. So
that's true.
another
Another
great
episode
film,
we've done.
yeah. But but something honestly that's picking up here that's really weird. That's probably the closest parallel is lacrosse. I'm seeing
Hmm,
a lot more teenagers playing lacrosse.
interesting.
I know. I'm gonna have to go learn about lacrosse.
Well, this part of the movie, it kinda reminds me of, like, when you watch like Wayne's World, or anything that's set in a place where people play hockey and people are wearing hockey jerseys and they're passionate about hockey. So it just always stood out to me in this movie, and so that's why I asked you. I'm like, did you guys play hockey where you're from? Is that something you relate
Well,
to?
if he had set that, if he'd have grown up in you know Georgia, Florida, Texas, that would have been Saturday pickup football, and he'd have
Right,
set it in the
right.
fall. But
Hmm.
the whole point is that it was a social, active outdoor thing that he was going
Hmm.
to be deprived of. I think,
Yeah,
and I
yeah.
think, and so for him, yeah, it's street hockey because that's what he had. So of course, you're right what you know. So
Hmm.
he wrote street hockey, and there's nothing wrong with that at all.
No.
But yeah, I didn't know. I'd be interested. I don't know. Now I want to see lacrosse in a movie.
In a movie
In a
depicted,
movie.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, all the old people up here are learning to play pickleball.
Okay, I don't know
Um,
how to play that either.
yeah, I learned it one time at a work thing.
Yeah, I'm like
So
I'm a very traditional nerd in that I'm not very gifted in terms of sports, so um, that's to put it mildly. But yeah, I liked that part of the movie too, where they close the store down and they play. I mean, kind of highlighting the fact that their jobs aren't super important, and Dante's willing to bend the rules. Or I guess you talk about Randall kind of pulling the strings. He definitely pulls the strings into getting him to break the rules sometimes, and
and
that's a
but
funny
on
part of
that
the
one he
movie.
didn't, because
Oh,
it's
that's
like
true.
because when he the boss he gets off the phone, he went to fucking Vermont, and he goes, "Don't you have a hockey game at 2?" Yes. Why but then Dante completely comes up with that fix on his own.
That's true.
Uh,
He's like, this is the one thing he can't let go. He's
right.
not gonna miss
It's like
hockey.
no, 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 and because it's mentioned in the morning. That's Chekhov's gun. He takes that call at 6 o'clock in the morning. But I got hockey at 2. All right, swear to me you'll be there by
Oh,
noon.
that's true.
Swear to me that
Okay.
you'll be there by noon.
Man, that guy really is a liar. But it also highlights the fact that they live in a state where, you can drive to Vermont. Here in Texas, you drive for several hours and you'd be in Texas still, but
Yeah, Utah's kind of the same way. If I
um,
go north, it takes me about an hour to get out of the state.
yeah,
If I go south, it takes me about 3.5, 4 hours to get out of the state.
yeah, yeah.
It should take more than that now that I think about the mileage, but I guess I drive really fast.
And gas prices these days, it's
Yikes.
yeah. But, yeah, I thought that part was pretty funny, and then I like that argument that he has with the guy on the roof who gets so impassioned he actually goes up there and starts playing with them.
Yeah, for ulterior.
I
Oh,
thought that
don't
was
pass
funny.
it to this guy. He sucks. Yeah, that's every sport's everywhere, especially if you're already angry about something else. But again,
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like that's a guy thing. The quickest way to get what you want is, I mean, because guys will go low fast. So if you piss me off and you're doing something else, I will immediately start critiquing how you are doing said other thing. Uh,
Yeah.
so but again, he kind of had a plan, I think. But
Yeah, yeah.
or if he didn't, he saw his opportunity and he took it, which is
Mhm.
also awesome. Uh, so yeah, but no, the whole hockey sequence is great because you're just like, hell yeah, that's whatever you're geek. I mean, you're a tabletop gaming nerd and you work overnights somewhere. It's like, but I'm not supposed to work, but I'm supposed to be gaming. It's like, well, why can't we game here?
Yeah.
And all your buddies come over and you do whatever where you're at. I mean,
Yeah.
we're
Yeah.
nerds everywhere. You make it work.
Yeah.
I think I played Dungeons and Dragons once in a Bennigan's restaurant. In
You
a
said in what kind of restaurant?
Bennigan's.
Dang, that's a throwback.
It is, yeah. It is,
I miss Finnegan's.
no more Bennigan's
I
at
know,
one of the huge
depressing.
corner booths with like the
Gosh,
30
I
square foot
of
table.
all
It's
the
awesome.
restaurants to go down, it shouldn't have been Bennigan's. It really should not have, because
No,
that place was awesome.
yeah,
Um,
but no, so
yeah.
it makes it work. But yeah, that was why. How did Dante? Oh, that's me spitting water in the face of life.
Yeah.
So that was his little moment of rebellion.
Ooh, another time capsule thing. So many times in the movie, Randall and other people are reading through magazines, and that's sort of meant to express that they're not paying attention, that they're being lazy, that they're distracted. Nowadays,
It would
you'd
be
be looking at your
phones.
phone. Yeah.
Yep,
It's like, man,
surfing the gram.
passing the time just reading a magazine. That doesn't happen anymore.
No, not at all. But yeah, no, that desire to socially isolate, um, which actually that leads into actually another one of my favorite bits of dialogue when they're going to go to the funeral, to the wake. And he goes, "Well,
Oh,
I have to
yeah.
go. Well, we can't both go. Well, I'm going." It's like, but you don't even like people. But I love gatherings. Isn't it ironic? So yeah, that need for social isolation, but that need for social presence, I guess.
Mhm.
I want to be there, but just leave me alone. So
Yeah.
that's a great line. That's actually echoed. Oh God, I don't even know if she's aware of it. Felicia Day. Um, there's an exact same or very similar line in The Guild in one of the
Mm.
early episodes when they first all meet up and
Oh, yeah.
when they're
Gosh,
at
it's been a long time
thing and
since I
yeah
watched that.
the Tinkerballa, they recognize her and she's, "Don't talk to me. I haven't decided if I'm going to hang out with you yet." And she's just watching. She's on her phone, but she's aware. But the phone is the buffer. But she
Yes.
makes it clear that just don't talk to me. I'm aware of who you are. I just don't know if we're there yet. So it's kind of a similar moment, but it's kind of a universal moment. It's like
Yeah.
when you walk into the party. If you're not sure, you kind of skirt to the side and you start taking stock.
Yeah.
And then
Very much
you
so.
know what's the old joke? I'm the kind of person that would go to a party and make friends with the dog.
Yes.
So I'm at the party, but am I at the party? No, I'm with the dog. So
And will I say goodbye to everyone when I leave? Probably not.
exactly. So that's another kind of little universal bit of thing. But you're right. The equivalent now it would be the phone. People just head down, headphones in. You
Or
know,
him finding out that, Caitlin is getting married through the newspaper.
right?
I mean, I don't think anybody does that anymore.
Only if you're lucky enough to live in a town with a newspaper and rich enough to decide to pay for an ad.
Right. And
Otherwise, it
and
just
I
goes
love
out
when
as a Facebook event.
yes. And I love when he calls too and is like, "Do you think maybe it was a
Yeah, no,
misprint?" And
yeah.
I love that part. It's so desperate and sad.
So desperate and sad. That actually sums up Dante for the first 2/3 of the movie. So
Yes.
desperate and
So
sad.
stuck. So stuck.
No, it's excellent. Excellent. But yeah, this just it's and it Clerks just it does so much and you see so much of it that permeates most of what Kevin Smith does later. And I think that's the
Yeah.
other reason I like Clerks so much is because you watch everything he does after that and you can almost always trace it back to this. I mean, it's the Iron Man of the View Askew universe, as he calls it. Everything just kind of in Marvel touches back to Iron Man. Or everything in all his other film, in most of his other films. There's a couple that don't. Uh, you can see those roots or those things that he learned or those things that he did back in Clerks. And so it's always
Yeah.
fun when I watch the later films to think. I always wind up thinking about Clerks anyway.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, were there any other scenes that you wanted to make sure we discuss that we haven't touched on yet?
Oh, God, there. Like I said, it's for me, it's always about the dialogue.
Mhm.
Um, and that is always the best part of watching a film for me. But I have to go back to the Death Star discussion, because the
Yeah.
fact that Dante's just at the counter he's reading a magazine at the
Yep.
time they're having this discussion, and Randall's tooling up and down the aisles grabbing snack food. So this isn't a conversation like they're standing next to one another. It's across the
Mhm.
building, and then you get the customer comes in. Um, but again, it's just that universal theme of community almost. Well, there's a Star Wars community, and the contractor does drywall can find a way into that discussion in an
Yeah.
intelligent manner. You know what I mean? It's he
Mhm.
wasn't, just feeling left out from the young kids talking. But it was an intelligent way to break into that discussion, and he kind of shut them both up at the end. They kind of looked at you
Yeah.
like, wow, that was kind of profound, really, and that was the end of the conversation. Not that he
It's kinda
ended the
messed up
yeah,
too,
it
the way
is.
he, he threw that other contractor under the bus,
Yeah,
didn't warn him.
because I did my research. Yeah, so but it's great. It, that, but like but that scene tells you so much about Kevin Smith about those two characters, Dante and Randall,
Mhm.
because the way they look at The Empire Strikes Back and Star Wars in general. But then Kevin as a writer, the way he constructs his dialogue, again, you learn so much without them talk. They're not talking about themselves at
Yeah.
all, and yet so much is exposed about his characters.
Mhm.
That
Mhm.
it's just great. It's one of my favorite interactions in that film.
Yeah, very good. Well, I guess if we're towards the end of this then, I have 2 more questions to ask you.
Go for it.
Number 1, what is it about this movie? I know that it's what we've been talking
Right.
about, why you love it so much, but how would you summarize why you love this movie so much?
I love it because it's on paper. It's one of those movies that on paper really shouldn't work. Um, and there are a lot of movies and television shows like that. That if you like read
Yeah.
them, you're like that. This is
Well,
garbage,
Seinfeld's a
right?
show about nothing.
Well, if one of my favorite television shows is Firefly, but if you read the description, if you describe that show to someone, it doesn't work. It doesn't make any sense at
Mm,
all. But until you get these actors and these characters delivering these lines, and then you're like, oh, I get it. And that's what Clerks does. It's just it's as much as we say, it's very 90s. It's kind of a perfect encapsulation of that time, socially,
mhm.
economically, um, cinematically. I mean, cinematically, it's grunge.
Yes, very
You know what I
much
mean?
so.
So it's and we didn't even talk about the music in the film. I don't like necessarily that style of music, but every song choice he made is appropriate for the places he's using it. So it's just kind of
Yeah.
this. The reason I like it is it's this perfect little confluence of time and space and performance that just works. If he makes that movie 2 years earlier, I don't think he's the director that he needs to be, or the script isn't where it needs to be. If he makes that movie 2 years later, I don't think society's where it needs to be. We will have moved past grunge a little more. We're out of,
Mhm.
we're now we're talking about a certain sex act, and we've got a president.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I mean, so it's
Interesting.
just this weird little encapsulation of a lot of little things
Mhm.
that it's like a little cinematic multivitamin. It's just got a
That's
little
a
bit
good
of
way to put
everything
it.
that all works together. And that's why I like it, because I can always, no matter where it is, I can always stop. I mean, unless my wife's in the living room, I she would put up with it, but I know it's not her first choice. So, but if I'm just flipping around and Clerks is on, I'll stop there, and I'll either continue watching it depending on where it is, or I'll pull up the guide and make sure there's nothing that can possibly beat Clerks before I change the channel. So,
Got it.
but that's why it's there are a few movies that I think are just perfect at what they do. And so while they may or may not be quote unquote perfect films, they're perfect films. Clerks is one of those. Another one completely out of bounds, of course, is Monty Python and the Holy Grail. That is
Yes, good,
inarguably
good movie.
it is a perfect film because of what it is, not
Yeah,
because it's this perfect. It's not some Spielbergian masterpiece. Um,
right.
but objectively, but yeah, so that's what Clerks is for me. It's just a perfect film that you can sit down and spend 90 minutes just living in this little world, and you're okay.
Yeah. And you kind of already answered this with your multivitamin
Uh,
comparison, but how would you pitch this to someone that hasn't seen one of these movies before?
one of Kevin's movies, or just hasn't
Yeah,
seen Clerks.
yeah, or Clerks specifically, more
Okay, well,
specifically.
Clerks specifically. If I was going to have to try, well, that would also depend on who I'm selling it to.
Sure,
Uh,
sure.
but you have to say, if I know they don't have a problem with the language and whatnot, then I just have to tell them, look, I just have to ask them to trust me. You're going to see characters that more than you will care to admit when the movie is over.
Very true.
Um,
Especially if you grew up in this time.
yeah, and if even now a lot of it translates,
Yeah,
but if I know someone really would have a problem with all of the language and the sex talk, because it's not like we don't see sex in this film. we
right,
we hear
right.
a lot of talk about it. um but if I knew, so I would be like, if you can get past that, I would use the exact same argument. You're gonna identify with these guys way more than you think is possible. And it's true. I don't think anybody can watch this and honestly say that they don't see something of themselves in these characters.
Yeah, yeah. I concur. Well, Mark, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to be on this show. This is a really good discussion. I had a lot of fun. And quick before you go, real quick before you go, do you want to go ahead and do your plugs again?
Oh,
Where can
absolutely.
people find you?
If you want to listen to the Visually Stunning Movie Podcast, the easiest way to do so is to follow us on Twitter at VS Movie Podcast, um, or you can jump to our website vsmoviepodcast.com. We're also on YouTube, Visually Stunning Movie Podcast. A lot of our episodes wind up going there, but not all. That's why I suggest Twitter as your first option.
Ah, okay.
We are shifting our distribution from a personal website to Acast, although the website will still be up for written reviews and
Okay.
everything else. But if you're an Acast user, you can find us there now too. Or
Very cool.
basically
Well,
any place else you get a podcast, you can find us.
awesome. Well, we'll have to have you back soon. Thank you so much again.
Oh, absolutely, my pleasure. I'll have to pick another fun one to talk about then.
Yes, absolutely.